Back in 2013, Netflix set out to prove it wasn't just an online video rental service. That was the year it released House of Cards and changed the game forever. Anyone who lived through that era knows it wasn't just a show, it was an event. From the very first scene, when Frank Underwood stares straight into the camera and explains why he's about to do something terrible, we knew we were in for something way darker than your average political drama. This wasn't just about politics, it was a masterclass in manipulation, a step-by-step guide to being a charming scumbag with honors. Frank and Claire Underwood weren't your typical villains. They were a team, a force of nature that made the Joker and Harley Quinn look like a happy couple in a cereal commercial. Today, we're revisiting this twisted journey of power, betrayal, and razor-sharp one-liners that defined an era. And stick around until the end, because beyond the murders and backstabbing, we'll talk about how reality ended up beating fiction in the worst way possible, nearly destroying the legacy of the show. Tires screech, a dog whimpers. Frank Underwood steps out of his house, nearly dressed for a New Year's Eve gala. He kneels beside the animal, the victim of the hit and run, and suffocates it on the spot. As he does, he looks at the camera and explains there are two kinds of pain, the kind that makes you strong and useless pain, the kind that's just suffering, and he's willing to do what's unpleasant but necessary. You already get the guy's vibe.
Unpleasant thing, the necessary thing.
At the party, Frank has his eyes on the new president, Garrett Walker. He helped the man win and is now waiting for his reward, the position of Secretary of State, but the Chief of Staff, Linda, pulls him aside and breaks the news. The promise is off the table. The president needs him where he is, and the job is going to some guy named Michael Kern. The look on Frank's face is priceless, like he just got the ending of his favorite show spoiled. Meanwhile, we meet Zoe Barnes, a rookie journalist desperate to break out of the monotony of print news and willing to do anything to stand out. And then there's Peter Russo, a congressman who lies to a donor, claiming he's on the phone with the president when he's actually dirty talking his assistant. Frank returns home and tells his wife, Claire, that he's been betrayed. She's livid, not at the betrayal, but because he didn't tell her sooner. Now, she's 100% behind him on his revenge plot. Frank and his right-hand man, Doug Stamper, decide to start with Kern. As he puts it himself, that's how you devour a whale, one bite at a time. Peter Russo's life is turned upside down when he's caught driving drunk with a prostitute. But Doug, on Frank's orders, makes the case disappear. In exchange, absolute loyalty. Frank now has Russo in his pocket. At the same time, Zoe crosses paths with Frank, and after an exchange of glances and a compromising photo, she goes to his house to offer her services. She can be his source in the media. The game is just beginning. Frank leaks her a draft of a highly controversial education bill, and Zoe's story lands on the front page, right on the president's inauguration day. Frank devours a rack of ribs and tells the camera, "I'm hungry today." Frank is still savoring his victory and the ribs when the education bill leak explodes into chaos. The president's chief of staff, Linda, calls him in a panic. The result, Frank is given carte blanche to fix the mess exactly as he wanted. The first step is to sideline the bill's author, Donald Blythe. With a masterclass in manipulation, Frank makes the guy feel guilty and take public responsibility. Goodbye, Blythe. The next victim is Michael Kern, the man who stole Frank's job. He calls Zoe and hands her an old college article, supposedly written by Kern, that criticizes Israel. It's explosive material. Zoe's editors are hesitant, but she plays the 21st century journalism card. Either they publish it or she'll post it on a blog and it'll blow up on Twitter. The threat works. The bombshell drops live on TV. A journalist confronts Kern with Zoe's article. The guy stammers, tries to laugh it off, and Frank, watching with a front row seat, knows his career just ended. To make sure, Frank's right-hand man, Stamper, sends Peter Russo on a side mission, find the article's true author. Russo finds the guy an anti-government nut who confesses to writing the whole thing, but it's too late. The media has already descended on Kern, who is now seen as an anti-Semite. His nomination is dead in the water. While Kern tries to save his own skin, Frank is already on to the next step. He calls Catherine Durant and tells her to get ready. Then he leaks her name to Zoe as the new frontrunner for the position. The media loves the idea, and by the time Frank meets with the White House, the choice is practically a formality. He doesn't even have to push hard to convince them. He just confirms that Durant is the perfect choice. Checkmate. And the White House? They don't even know they're in the game. Frank is in the middle of a tense negotiation with the teachers union when urgent news pulls him from the room. Back in his hometown of Gaffney, a teenage girl has died in a car accident. The cause? She was texting about the Peachoid, a peach-shaped water tower that looks like a giant To make matters worse, a local politician who hates Frank, Orrin Chase, is egging on the family to sue the city. Frank has to drop everything and head to Gaffney to put out the fire. The aforementioned Chase refuses to help, eager to see the whole thing go up in flames. But Frank doesn't waste time. In a meeting with the city council, he devises a plan in seconds: raise money for a settlement, create a campaign against texting and driving, and turn off the lights on the water butt to save money and reduce distractions. While handling the mess, Frank doesn't stop. He attends a vigil for the girl, where he feels the father's hostility and arranges a small favor with the church's pastor. At night, he joins a conference call about the education bill but leaves it on mute to flirt with Zoe over text. The conversation heats up to a dangerous level, and she even promises to blow him a kiss on TV the next day, and she delivers.
I love him. He's a great mentor, right?
Should newspapers adapt to the times we live in?
It's not that
The following day, at church, Frank takes the pulpit and puts on a show. He delivers a powerful sermon on hate and loss, screaming, "I hate you, God," in front of the entire congregation. He connects with everyone by speaking of his own father's death, which, in private, he admits wasn't a big deal. The performance is so convincing that the girl's family drops the lawsuit and accepts a scholarship in her name. Mission accomplished, but there's one last thing: to put Orrin in his place. Frank drives to the man's property and, with chilling calm, reminds him that the county is responsible for the lack of guardrails on the road where the accident happened. What's more, he can use his power to have power lines installed right across Orrin's land. The man is speechless. Frank doesn't want to destroy him, just show him who's boss. He offers a deal, and Orrin, with no other choice, accepts. It's Frank Underwood being Frank Underwood. Back in Washington, the only thing Frank Underwood wants to see ripen is his education reform. He goes straight to the Speaker of the House, Bob Birch, to try and speed things up, but the negotiation is a game of ping pong. Birch won't budge, the president's representative won't budge, and Frank is stuck in the middle, running from one side to the other. This is going to take a while. That is, until President Walker himself suggests a compromise. But Frank changes his mind on the spot. To him, backing down now would make the Oval Office look weak, and he won't let that happen. It's obvious he already has a plan B up his sleeve. Frank approaches the majority leader, David, and dangles the bait. How about becoming the new Speaker of the House? All he has to do is help get Birch out of the way, but David doesn't bite. No problem. Frank and his loyal subordinate, Stamper, draw up a new plan. Get the support of Terry, the leader of the Black Caucus, who can deliver the necessary votes. The trade is simple. Frank will prevent the closure of a military base in Terry's district. To do this, he pays a rather depressing visit to another congressman and convinces him not to defend his own base. With everything in place, Frank offers Terry not just the base, but also the position of majority leader. Deal, now, for the checkmate. Frank goes to Birch and, pretending to be a friend, warns him about David's plan to take his job. But of course, he can help. In return, Birch needs to appoint Terry and obviously pass the education reform. David is blindsided and resigns. At the end of the day, a drunk Zoe Barnes calls Frank. The conversation goes from "where are you going" to "your place or mine." He shows up at her apartment for the first time. The atmosphere is tense. "Have you had older men? They hurt you and then they discard you," he says. "You can't hurt me," she replies. He looks at her and orders, "Take off your heels."
You can't hurt me.
She's excitedly telling Frank about the job offers she's received, while he, with chilling coldness, drops her phone into a glass of water and promises to get her 2 new ones. To Claire, he sums up the situation. Zoe is just a megaphone he can control. Meanwhile, Peter Russo's life is falling apart. His girlfriend and aide, Christina, leaves him. To make matters worse, a childhood friend shows up, demanding he honor his promise to save a shipyard with 12,000 jobs. But Peter, his hands tied by Frank, can do nothing and is called a sellout. Frank makes a new enemy, Marty Spinella, the teachers' union lobbyist, who is furious about being deceived. Frank knows things are about to get ugly, noting that friends make the worst enemies, and he's not wrong, as he soon discovers a massive strike is on the horizon. In the midst of all this, Claire is struggling to raise funds for her charity gala. Spinella's union blockades the event's hotel, but Claire is a tough nut to crack and decides to hold the party outside, right on the street. The tension between Frank and Zoe escalates. To prove her loyalty, she lets him take new photos of her as a bizarre form of collateral. Later, Frank decides he's going to make Peter Russo the next governor of Pennsylvania. But first, Peter shows up at his house in tears, blaming Frank for his life being a wreck. Frank takes him to the bathroom, gives him a motivational speech, and at the end, hands him a razor blade, suggesting a coward's way out. It's the Underwood way of saying, "Get your shit together or get out of my way."
It's up to you, Peter.
The teachers' strike is a month in, and the White House is panicking. They want Frank to give in, but he asks for 1 week to solve it his way. The pressure mounts when a brick is thrown through his window. Frank seizes the chaos. He has Zoe write a story blaming the union leader, Marty Spinella, and his wife, Claire. Even coins the perfect nickname for the movement, disorganized labor. The smear campaign works, and Spinella is forced to agree to a live debate on CNN. Except the debate is a complete disaster for Frank. Spinella comes prepared, refutes every accusation, and even makes Frank look like an idiot when he fumbles a metaphor about vowels, becoming a national laughingstock. Even after being humiliated, Frank doesn't stop. He convinces the party to back Peter Russo for governor, on the condition that Peter joins Alcoholics Anonymous. The strike situation only worsens until tragedy strikes. A child is killed by a stray bullet as schools are closed. Frank sees the perfect opportunity. He rushes to the grieving mother's side, gets on camera, and blames the strike for the boy's death. It's the final blow. He calls Spinella for a negotiation, but it's really a trap. Frank confesses that he staged the brick attack himself. Spinella, blind with rage, punches Frank in the face. Checkmate.
Come on, you.
You. Look, I'll tell them you provoked me. I'll tell them.
Frank threatens to sue him for assaulting a congressman, a federal crime, unless he ends the strike immediately. Meanwhile, Claire pays a very strange visit to her former security guard in the hospital, a secret she keeps to herself. Mission accomplished for Frank. President Walker finally signs the education bill, which in practice means Frank now has the president in the palm of his hand. It's like when you help your friend beat a video game level, and they owe you a life. As Frank celebrates, Vice President Matthews looks like he just swallowed a lemon, feeling completely sidelined in the whole affair. Meanwhile, Peter Russo is on his path to redemption, attending AA meetings to prepare for his gubernatorial campaign. It's the classic image cleansing operation before asking for votes. Speaking of the campaign, Frank, who wastes no time, uses his connection with Zoe to plant some positive news stories and make the administration's image shine. But the man is a puppet master. He goes after Christina, Russo's ex, and convinces her to forgive him and become his deputy campaign manager. With this move, he not only helps Russo, but also rekindles the flame between the two. A true political Cupid. In the midst of all this maneuvering, a ghost from Doug Stamper's past reappears, proving that no one in this universe has a clean slate. And to top it off, Zoe, showing she knows how to play the game too, recommends fellow journalist Janine Skorsky for a job, expanding her own network of contacts. While Russo is in redemption mode, Frank is in look at me, I'm amazing mode. His alma mater, the Sentinel, is dedicating a library in his honor. It's the kind of thing that inflates anyone's ego. Frank takes advantage of the trip down memory lane to reunite with his old college buddies, the same crew he probably raised hell with back in the day. It's a moment of nostalgia for our anti-hero. On the other side of the coin, Peter Russo returns to his hometown of Philadelphia to begin his own apology tour. First stop is his mother's house, because you have to start fixing things at the source. The visit is clearly an important step to show that he's trying to become a new man. After securing his mother's blessing, the next on the list is Paul. Russo goes to him to try and mend the relationship he himself destroyed. It's an attempt to put out the fires of the past before the campaign truly heats up. While Frank celebrates his legacy with friends, Russo is on his knees trying to rebuild his. Russo's bus tour campaign is about to kick off in earnest, but reality comes knocking hard. Claire, in a good Samaritan moment, gives Russo's kids a ride to school. What seemed like a nice gesture turns into a heavy therapy session in the back of the car. The children drop a bombshell. Their classmates hate them, and the bullying is of the cruelest kind. They tell Claire they're called crack babies, and that their father is accused of being an addict. It's a gut punch that shows Russo's past haunts not just him, but especially his family. While Russo prepares to give speeches and shake hands, his children are living through hell because of his mistakes. The scene makes clear the extremely high price paid in public life, where the sins of the father fall directly upon the children in the most brutal way. Claire, in the middle of that emotional chaos, witnesses firsthand the destruction that politics can cause. Zoe comes in swinging and lays it on the line for Frank. She knows Claire sabotaged the Watershed Project and will expose everything unless he gives her an even hotter scoop. This obviously sparks a massive fight between Frank and Claire. Peter Russo is also pissed. He was counting on the project for his gubernatorial campaign and now threatens to drag Frank's reputation through the mud. To retaliate, Claire pays a surprise visit to Zoe's apartment, rifling through her things to show her what it feels like to have her privacy invaded. Meanwhile, Frank is playing 4D chess. He asks Jillian to help Linda's son get into Stanford and at the same time brokers a deal with the lobbyist Remy. If Peter supports Sandcorp's drilling, the company will fund his campaign. It's a quid pro quo that promises thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania. And Claire, she's gone to visit the photographer Adam to continue their affair. Frank's master plan to destroy Peter goes into motion. He has Stamper set up an apartment for Rachel, the from the earlier incident, with one mission: seduce Peter at a charity event. It works like a charm. Rachel convinces Peter to drink and takes him to a hotel room. In the middle of all this, Zoe, her apartment trashed, ends up crashing at her colleague Lucas's place and, without a second thought, jumps into bed with him. Peter wakes up late for a crucial radio interview. Stamper immediately knows he's in no condition to speak, and the result is a complete disaster, with Peter stammering incoherently on air. Stamper has to hang up on him. Soon after, Zoe receives a text from Frank. The hot story she wanted was on the air. To cap it off, Peter tries to take a shower to sober up, but when Stamper goes to check on him, nothing. The shower is running, but Peter is gone. Speaking of problems, Peter Russo has hit rock bottom. He continues to drink non-stop, pays a drunken visit to his ex's house, calls his kids, and then turns himself into the police, confessing to driving drunk. But who shows up to save the day? Frank himself, accompanied by Stamper. Frank drives Peter home, but the ride has a grim final destination: the garage. Inside, he encourages Peter to drink more and more until the man passes out in the driver's seat. Then, with the coldness of a serial killer, Frank wipes his fingerprints from everything he touched, starts the car's engine, and closes the garage door, leaving Peter inside to die of carbon monoxide poisoning. The next morning, Frank's plan comes to fruition. He's in a meeting with the president and Linda, where they decide that the vice president will run for governor in Peter's place. In the middle of the conversation, the bombshell drops. They are informed that Peter Russo has been found dead in his garage. Everyone assumes it was suicide, and Frank's plan works flawlessly. To put the final nail in the coffin, Claire returns home, as if nothing ever happened. We jump forward 1 month in time. We meet Paul Capra, the head of the shipbuilders union, knocking on the door of Christina, Peter's former aide. She suggests he run for the House seat left vacant by Peter. Paul is shocked to learn that Christina didn't even attend the funeral, but she's in total business mode, saying she can't let feelings interfere with her work for the 600,000 people who depend on her. Cold as ice. Meanwhile, at the White House, the search for a new vice president is proving harder than finding a needle in a haystack. They interview a candidate who barely says a word, leaving President Walker fuming because his list of options is only shrinking. That's when Linda, the president's right-hand woman, dangles the bait Frank has been waiting for. She says she's going to suggest his name for the position. Frank's plan, which began with Peter's downfall, is about to reach checkmate. Far away, in the Slugline newsroom, journalist Janine is connecting the dots on Peter's death. Talking with Paul Capra, she uncovers a crucial detail. Peter was under intense pressure to allow the shipyard to be closed. This information raises a red flag. The story of Peter's suicide is starting to seem thin, and now people are sniffing around for the truth behind the tragedy. Frank's web of lies might be about to unravel. He's in a foul mood, smashing a faucet with a hammer. Clearly, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Shortly after, he meets with Remy, the Sandcorp lobbyist, and drops a bombshell. President Walker is considering nominating Raymond Tusk, a nuclear energy billionaire, as his VP. Frank, no fool, hatches a plan for Sandcorp, a natural gas company, to sabotage Tusk's businesses. It's savage capitalism in its purest form. Meanwhile, Claire is dealing with a lawsuit. Her former employee, Jillian, is accusing her of wrongful termination due to her pregnancy. The lawyer suggests a settlement, but it seems there's more to the story. In another part of the city, the reporting duo Zoe and Janine are in full-on CSI mode, trying to unravel the death of Congressman Peter Russo. They need his arrest record to find out who bailed him out of jail. Zoe even tries to ask Lucas for help, but he dodges the question. Later, Lucas shows up at Zoe's apartment, all mysterious, saying the cover-up of Russo's case goes all the way to the top of the police force. He hands her photos of the escort who was with him, a prostitute named Rachel. He warns her it's dangerous, but Zoe, of course, isn't backing down. The plot thickens when Frank realizes Remy might be playing both sides. In the midst of nightmares about children he never had, Frank gets a visit from Remy, who basically confirms he's going to do things his way. The climax happens at a barbecue joint, where Frank meets Tusk and Remy. Tusk reveals he's bought shares in Sandcorp and that Remy now works for him. It's a checkmate, except it's not. In the end, President Walker reveals it was all a test. He sent Frank to be vetted by Tusk, and the vice presidency? It's Frank's. He accepts.
Say yes.
Yes. It would be a great honor, Mr. President.
And a suspicious Zoe starts to think that Frank actually wanted Russo to destroy himself all along. Claire decides to get the upper hand and puts Jillian firmly in her place, showing her who's boss. But the main event of the episode is something else entirely: Zoe Barnes. Frank arranges a meeting with her at a train station in disguise for a final conversation. He proposes a clean slate, and she, naively, deletes all their messages and his contact information. But Zoe can't hold her tongue and keeps asking about Russo's death, revealing she even knows about Rachel's existence. At that moment, an alarm goes off in Frank's head. She knows too much. He lures her to a more isolated part of the platform, pretending to flee. When Zoe turns the corner, expecting to find him, he's there, waiting. In one swift, cold motion, Frank shoves her in front of an approaching train. Zoe's death is calculated to look like a tragic accident. The public place, the lack of any contact history on her phone, it's all part of the plan. Frank Underwood has just eliminated one of the biggest threats to his power in the most brutal and silent way possible, proving there are no limits to what he will do to protect his secrets. It's the end of the line for Zoe, literally.
Jesus.
I want to believe you.
Now, as vice president, Frank immediately starts laying down the law, and his own house is being upgraded with state-of-the-art security. He's barely warmed his new chair before he's already sabotaging a trade meeting with China just to annoy the billionaire Raymond Tusk and diminish his influence over the president. That's Frank being Frank. Meanwhile, Jackie, eyeing the majority whip position in the house, shows she's learned well from the master and doesn't hesitate to destroy her own mentor's career to get what she wants. In a parallel storyline, Lucas, still reeling from Zoe's death, dives into the deep web looking for a hacker to break into Frank's phone records, trying to prove his connection to the deaths. It feels like something out of a spy movie. But the episode takes a heavy turn when, during a military ceremony, Claire reveals to Frank that she was raped years ago by a general who has just been promoted. The tension is palpable. Later, using the chaos with China to his advantage, Frank convinces the president to take a hardline stance, which results in a complete breakdown of negotiations. Another point for Frank in his Cold War against Tusk. The man simply never stops playing 4D chess with everyone. Frank Underwood is in full political mastermind mode, trying to pass a bill to prevent a government shutdown. It's like a high-speed game of chess. To do it, he needs a deal with the opposition leader, Hector. But, as always, the other side decides to play dirty and attempts a filibuster, a tactic of talking endlessly until everyone gives up. This forces Frank to pull out his heaviest hitters. While Frank plays his Game of Thrones in Washington, journalist Lucas Goodwin is playing detective. He tries unsuccessfully to get any information out of the late Peter Russo's ex. Out of luck, he ends up finding a hacker, Gavin, who promises to be his guy in the chair, claiming he can get Zoe's phone records. Sounds too good to be true, right? And of course, it is. Doug Stamper, Frank's sinister fixer, is already one step ahead. He sets up a trap with the FBI to catch Lucas red-handed, turning the journalist's life into a spy movie where he's the target. And while Doug is busy being the puppet master, his own puppet, Rachel, decides to break the rules. She's supposed to be in hiding, living like a ghost, but she decides to call her mother and even befriends someone named Lisa Williams. This definitely won't end well. The Underwoods are about to give their first major TV interview, the golden moment for the power couple. But first, Frank needs to secure the final votes for his bill. His target this time is Donald Blythe, a guy who still holds a massive grudge against Frank over an old feud. Suddenly, chaos. A package with a mysterious white powder arrives at the Capitol, and the entire building goes into lockdown. Frank and Blythe are trapped together. What a situation. For Frank, this isn't a crisis, it's an opportunity. He uses the time to manipulate Blythe, even going so far as to use the man's sick wife to his advantage. A low blow, even by his standards. Meanwhile, Claire faces the interview alone. Under pressure, she admits to having an abortion, but invents on the spot that the pregnancy was the result of the rape he suffered from General McGinnis. The lie is a heavy one, but what happens next is even more bizarre. Another woman, also a victim of the general, comes forward and supports Claire's story, turning her into a hero. Meanwhile, Lucas's hacker, Gavin, he was an FBI informant all along. He tricks the journalist, who ends up committing a cybercrime and is arrested in the act. Game over for Lucas and his conspiracy theories. With the help of Jackie and Remy, Frank's bill passes by a razor-thin margin. To celebrate, Frank and Claire smoke a cigarette by the window, and he sings a deeply sinister murder ballad to her. Couple goals, but not really.
Let me sit beside you and tell you my mind. My mind is to marry and never to part.
Frank attends a Civil War reenactment, which is a pretty weird hobby to begin with, but he's not there for the history lesson. He's there to make under-the-table deals with Xander Feng, a filthy rich Chinese businessman. Frank quickly figures out that Feng and his arch-nemesis, Raymond Tusk, are in cahoots. The pair are manipulating a trade summit to line their own pockets. Frank doesn't let it slide. He decides to sabotage the entire summit, making Feng look like the main villain. The move works and creates a nasty fight between Tusk and President Walker. The president gets so pissed that he cancels U.S. participation in the negotiations, risking a trade war with China. Nice mess you made, Frank. And Lucas Goodwin? In his last, desperate attempt at justice, he walks right into the FBI's trap, set by Doug. He's arrested and taken away. Game over.
Earthquake. What exactly?
On the ground.
Right now.
On the ground. Sit on the ground.
To complete the chaos, a new player enters the scene, Seth Grayson. He discovers that Claire lied about the and tries to blackmail her, but the guy is smart. Instead of money, he uses the information to get a job on the Underwoods team. If you can't beat them, join them. And he immediately starts helping Claire, who, now with the support of the First Lady, is advocating for victims of assault in the military. The irony is palpable. As Frank Underwood helps the president handle an energy crisis with China, courtesy of Xander Feng and Raymond Tusk, Claire goes full-on villain, manipulating First Lady Tricia into believing that her assistant Christina has her eyes on the president. To resolve the crisis, Frank suggests subsidizing nuclear energy, which is essentially like poking the bear, putting him even further in Tusk's crosshairs. Meanwhile, Doug is in his possessive stalker mode with Rachel. He pressures her to stop seeing her friend Lisa and to quit going to church, under the guise that she needs to lay low. But the truth is, he's becoming emotionally invested and obsessed. Elsewhere, Lucas's former editor, Tom Hammerschmidt, takes over the jail journalist's investigation. But Frank and Doug are a brick wall. They intimidate Janine and force Lucas to accept a plea deal, putting an end to the investigation. Game over for the journalists. In the midst of this chaos, Jackie and Remy meet to discuss a bill and end up sleeping together, mixing business with pleasure. Jackie, however, makes it clear she's not looking for anything serious and dips out shortly after. Remy discovers that Tusk plans to fight the president's bill, but Frank tells Walker not to back down. And, in the most cinematic moment possible, as Frank prepares to throw the first pitch at a game at Camden Yards, Tusk sends a message. The stadium lights go out, a total blackout. In retaliation, Frank convinces Walker to seize Tusk's power plants. War is declared, and not even a meeting at Freddy's Barbecue can broker a peace between the two. The Democrats are in trouble in the midterm elections due to new attack ads, forcing Frank and Doug into damage control mode as they chase down cash from donors. To make matters worse, President Walker and his wife Tricia come over to the Underwoods for dinner. The result? A thoroughly uncomfortable meal. Tricia, with the seed of discord planted by Claire, seethes with jealousy over her husband's closeness to his assistant Christina. Claire, meanwhile, plays her own game, seeking support for her bill against sexual assault in the military. Away from politics, Remy tries to have the talk with Jackie to figure out where they stand, but the episode's big reveal is about Seth Grayson. We discover he was a mole for Remy, but being a professional opportunist, he jumps ship to work for Frank. Basically, he saw who was winning and bailed. Speaking of betrayal, Doug meets with Xander Feng to convince him to backstab Raymond Tusk, using the old divide and conquer tactic. To top it all off, Freddy, the owner of Frank's favorite barbecue joint, is interviewed about his relationship with the vice president. Even the barbecue guy has been dragged into the fray, and this could spell trouble for Frank. Frank is focused on passing his bridge project and goes on a direct collision course with Linda. The Oval Office showdown gets so ugly that Linda tenders her resignation, a point for Frank, who gets what he wants from the president. Meanwhile, Claire positions herself as the great defender of Megan, a victim of military assault. But, as always, she has a larger plan. Upon discovering the president president's marriage is hanging by a thread, she advises Trisha to try couples therapy, thus gaining the First Lady's trust. President Walker not only agrees to the therapy, but also approves Frank's bridge deal. The Underwood couple is working in perfect sync. On the other side, Remy is investigating the money trail from a casino for Jackie and ends up digging up a ghost from Claire's past, her ex-lover, Adam Galloway. It's then that he also confirms Seth has betrayed him and is now on Frank's team. Things heat up when Frank meets with Tusk, who offers to fund the Democrats in exchange for a reconciliation with the president. Frank pretends to agree and has Doug set up the meeting, but at the same time, he executes his masterstroke. Doug confirms the bridge deal with Fang and tells him to cut Tusk loose. After discovering the epic double cross, Tusk and Remy realize they've been played and decide to go on an all-out offensive against Frank. Far from all this, Rachel and her friend Lisa become a couple, a ticking time bomb about to explode in the obsessed Doug's face. The walls are closing in on Claire. A scandalous photo of her with photographer Adam Galloway suddenly leaks to the press, and Frank's team immediately convenes a crisis meeting. The strategy is simple. Claire will convince Galloway to deny everything and claim the photos were a personal gift for Frank, but Remy, who isn't playing around, adds fuel to the fire by leaking another photo, this time of Claire in the shower. To try and put out the fire, the strategist Grayson comes up with a crazy idea: recreate the photo with a look-alike, just to claim the image is a fake. CSI-level manipulation. Meanwhile, in a parallel universe, Freddy has sold his restaurant and is thrilled about buying a house for his son and grandson, but the joy is short-lived. Seeing that the Underwoods will do anything to save themselves, Remy decides to hit them where it hurts and leaks Freddy's criminal past. Frank tries to protect his friend, but Freddy's son makes things worse by threatening a photographer with a gun, violating his parole. At that point, Frank's hands are tied. He realizes Freddy's problem has snowballed and is forced to cut ties, abandoning his friend. To seal the deal, Galloway, pressured by Claire, releases a statement claiming the whole thing was just a marketing stunt on his part. The result, Freddy has to sell his new franchise to pay his son's bail, loses his business, and worst of all, disowns his friendship with Frank. For the first time, Frank feels a genuine pang of regret, but instead of changing him, it only fuels his determination to destroy Tusk for good.
I want him obliterated.
More than that.
I don't know whether to be proud or terrified.
Remember Rachel? Doug told her to lay low, but her friend Lisa completely ignored the warning and moved in with her, creating major tension. Far away from that drama, President Walker is busy trying to resolve a naval standoff between China and Japan, like a life-sized game of Risk, but the real bombshell is something else. Frank receives a threat from an ex-Marine who claims responsibility for the Capitol incident. Apparently, the target was Claire, and Frank, no fool, uses this as an excuse to assign Edward Meacham as her personal bodyguard. Since revenge is a dish best served cold, Frank's team leaks information to journalist Isla Syed linking Tusk to Len Agin's casino. The reporter, who is no fool, connects the dots and uncovers a massive money laundering scheme influencing Congress. She publishes the story, and the scandal blows up in the media. Frank, acting like a loyal friend, advises Walker to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate the case and clear the White House's name. While the battle rages, Frank and Jackie continue their private war over Claire's legislation, which Jackie, as a military veteran, does not support. And to make matters worse, Frank starts giving more weight to Grayson's strategies than to Doug's, as his right-hand man has become completely distracted by his obsession with Rachel. The guy is losing focus, and Frank has noticed. Doug vents during an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting about his feelings for Rachel. The guy is clearly at rock bottom emotionally. Speaking of rock bottom, a photo of Doug at Len Agin's casino leaks, and Frank is pissed, since everyone knows Doug is his #1 stooge. Seeing that their feud is becoming a liability, rivals Doug and Seth Grayson are forced to make peace and come up with a plan to smother the scandal. Frank continues his double game. He encourages the president to be an open book with Heather Dunbar, the special prosecutor, but when it's his turn, he becomes a brick wall. To feign cooperation, he hands over his travel logs. Seeing this, Remy tries to broker a deal to de-escalate the attacks, since his attempt to blackmail Jackie into turning on Frank failed miserably. Elsewhere, Claire's bill is sinking. Megan, her star witness, has panic attacks just thinking about speaking publicly. Seeing it all fall apart, Claire drowns her sorrows in drink. One night, she drops a glass, and Meacham, who is ending his shift, comes to clean it up and cuts his hand. She bandages it for him, the mood heats up, and when Frank arrives, he finds them both half drunk. What happens next? A menage a trois. Yes, you read that right. To top it all off, Doug goes full stalker and spies on Rachel having sex with Lisa, and Prosecutor Dunbar discovers the president's couple's therapy sessions in his travel logs. The fallout is about to hit more than a few people. The walls are closing in on President Walker, and the first thing he does is call Frank and blame him for everything. Obviously, their friendship goes down the drain. Meanwhile, Jackie is in the middle of a public feud with Megan over the assault bill. The fight escalates. Jackie attacks Claire, and Claire, to put out the fire, simply gives up on the bill. The result? Megan has a complete breakdown. On the political chessboard, Frank, as always, is playing on another level. He convinces everyone to grant immunity and asylum to businessman Xander Feng, and the guy, who's no fool, sings like a canary, confirming the money laundering scheme. This backs President Walker and the First Lady into a corner, forcing them to waive confidentiality with their marriage counselor. But Prosecutor Dunbar discovers that the therapist was instructed by the White House to lie and conceal that Walker was on controlled medication. The noose is tightening. To make matters worse, billionaire Tusk pleads the Fifth to avoid incriminating himself in his testimony. But Grayson, the master of discord, pits Tusk and Remy against each other like it's a reality TV show of betrayal. In the midst of this chaos, the Underwoods convince Jackie to jump to their side and help with Walker's impeachment. The argument, if they don't, the Democratic Party will tank in the next election. Speaking of drama, Doug lets his jealousy get the best of him and forces Rachel to kick her friend out of the house. And to top it off, the hacker Gavin tries to negotiate his own freedom with the FBI. It's every man for himself. Things start to really heat up. Linda is called to testify about the president's medication and the Chinese money. Meanwhile, Frank goes on television to play the good guy, swearing he serves the nation, not himself. In desperation, Walker hatches a plan. Offer Tusk a presidential pardon if he confesses everything and takes Frank down with him. But Frank, always one step ahead, has already scheduled a secret meeting with Tusk to spoil the party. The meeting takes place in the basement of an opera house, super dramatic, where Frank essentially tells him this pardon is worthless if the president who grants it gets impeached. In parallel, Megan attempts suicide, and Claire rushes to help, but the girl rejects her. After a tense call with the president's wife, Claire breaks down and cries. Back in the game, Frank writes a letter to Walker, swearing his loyalty and even attaching a fake confession to prove he's on his side. It's the pinnacle of manipulation. Walker falls for it, revokes the pardon offer to Tusk, and when it's Tusk's turn to testify, he learns that Remy is going to betray him. Cornered, he gives up his silence and utters, "He knew!" That's it. Walker's house of cards collapses. As the political world burns, the hacker Gavin blackmails Stamper, revealing he knows about Rachel. Desperate, Stamper tries to flee with her, but the girl panics, runs into a forest, and hits him over the head with a rock several times, leaving him for dead. With the impeachment approved, Walker resigns. Frank Underwood walks up the ramp of Air Force One as the new president of the United States. He enters the Oval Office alone, gives the desk 2 sharp knocks, and the episode ends. It's chilling. Then, Frank visits his father's grave, but instead of flowers, he leaves a deeply disrespectful gift. He simply urinates on the headstone, just to make it clear who's in charge, even in the great beyond. Meanwhile, we find out what happened to Doug Stamper, who was left for dead in the woods. He's found by a stranger, completely battered. He survives, but with serious brain damage, and his recovery will be slow and painful. With Doug out of commission, Remy takes over as acting chief of staff, and for vice president, Frank chooses the harmless Donald Blythe. But the first 6 months of his administration are a disaster, and the press is already calling Frank ineffective and leaderless. To try and change this image, he launches an ambitious jobs program called America Works, or AmWorks. Claire isn't sitting still either and already has her eye on a new position, United States Ambassador to the UN. The power couple never rests. In the midst of all this, the hacker Gavin, now working unwillingly for the FBI, is recruited by Stamper to help find Rachel, who has vanished off the map. And to show he still has a firm hand, Frank orders a drone strike that successfully eliminates a target abroad. But the most harrowing scene belongs to Doug. Suffering from post-surgery pain, he breaks his sobriety in a bizarre way, paying a prostitute to squirt whiskey into his mouth with a syringe. The man has hit rock bottom. Here we see Claire in a sort of job interview for the position of US Ambassador to the UN. But things go south fast. She makes a casual remark that turns into a heated argument, and the committee concludes she has too short a fuse for the job. Basically, she lost her composure and the position along with it. Meanwhile, Frank tries to sell his America Works project to the leaders of the Democratic Party, but gets shot down. The group, including Jackie, tells him they don't don't want him running for president in 2016. It's the classic thanks, but no thanks. Remy, at Frank's behest, makes a deal with Jackie. She becomes a mole and feeds them information about potential candidates, and in return, she gets the vice president spot on Frank's ticket in 2016. That night, the Underwood house turns into a call center. Frank phones potential campaign donors, and Claire tries to convince senators to vote for her. Spoiler alert, they both fail miserably. The next day, the Senate officially rejects Claire's nomination. To get around this, Frank makes a deal with the party leaders. He'll drop out of the 2016 race if they approve America Works. He even publicly announces he won't run, but we know it's pure theater. In the end, Claire doesn't admit defeat and asks for a recess appointment, a way to get the job without Senate approval. And Frank, of course, agrees. The White House is surrounded by protesters as Frank prepares for a tense meeting with Viktor Petrov, the president of Russia. Frank barely arrives before proposing an alliance to protect Israel, but Petrov flatly refuses. Without a second thought, Catherine Durant and Claire, now the UN ambassador thanks to that maneuver, also try to persuade the Russian leader, but it's a no-go. That evening, a state dinner descends into chaos. Members of Russian feminist group, who were among the guests, make a deeply offensive toast to Petrov and simply walk out. The tension is palpable. To make matters worse, Petrov spends the entire night flirting with Claire and even steals a kiss from her. While Frank and Petrov smoke cigars in the basement, Claire and Durant are upstairs playing beer pong, and Claire admits she doesn't trust the Russian president one bit. Petrov finally reveals what he wants in exchange for helping Israel, for the US to dismantle its entire missile defense system in Europe, a not-so-humble request. Frank tries to negotiate a middle ground, but Petrov won't budge, so Frank simply calls off the deal. Unfazed, Claire and Durant immediately start crafting a plan B, use a legal precedent to override Russia's veto in the UN Security Council, and send the troops anyway. The dynamic duo is not messing around. Attorney Heather Dunbar is defending the government in a Supreme Court case. The lawsuit is from a soldier who lost both legs in a drone strike that Frank himself ordered. Meanwhile, at the UN, Claire's resolution on Israel is vetoed by Russia, exactly as she expected. It was part of the plan. A golden opportunity arises for Frank. One of the Supreme Court justices, Jacobs, is diagnosed with Alzheimer's and is considering retirement. Frank, who wastes no time, offers the seat to Dunbar, hoping to take her out of the 2016 presidential race, and she accepts.
So, I need to know now.
Yes. It would be a great honor.
Good.
In the show's underbelly, Gavin continues his hacking mission to help Stamper find Rachel, suggesting he get close to her ex, Lisa Williams. But the tables turn. Russia arrests a gay rights activist in retaliation for the UN maneuver, and journalist Ayla Sayad loses her press credentials for asking Frank uncomfortable questions. Seeing all this, Dunbar turns down the Supreme Court seat and officially announces her candidacy for president. To complete Frank's nightmare, Stamper, feeling cast aside, goes to Dunbar and offers his services to her campaign. The betrayal is swift. Tormented, Frank goes to a church, argues with a bishop about power and God, and in a moment of fury, spits on a crucifix. As he tries to wipe it clean, he knocks over the statue, which shatters on the floor. Yes, the man has hit rock bottom. Frank Underwood is in I make the rules mode and decides to launch his jobs program, America Works, by force. Since he fired the Secretary of Homeland Security, FEMA's disaster relief funds go straight to him. And guess what? He diverts that money to fund his project. A genius of evil or just shameless? Meanwhile, he's playing 4D chess with politics. He calls in Jackie and tells her the plan. He wants her to run for president and publicly criticize him, and America Works. The idea is to draw focus away from Dunbar, who's been a thorn in his side over Russia. The reward? If the plan works, Frank promises she'll be his VP in 2016. Jackie agrees but is annoyed, thinking that being single and childless could hurt her campaign. Over at the UN, Claire's house of cards collapses. Her peace resolution is dead in the water because Russia started selling arms to Iran and everyone backed out of the deal. To make matters worse, congressional leaders inform Frank that they will fight America Works tooth and nail. And what about Stamper? He continues to shadow Dunbar, looking like an ex who can't move on, begging for a job. To prove his worth, he hands over a heavy-hitting dossier, a document proving Claire lied about an abortion Dunbar plays the saint, acting shocked by the dirty politics, but she hires Stamper on the spot. Hypocrisy is on full display. In the midst of all this, Jackie gets engaged, and Remy is left looking like he just sucked on a lemon. But Claire isn't one to stay down. She convinces Frank to use his presidential pen to send troops to Israel, and with that, Russia finally agrees to negotiate. Frank and Claire take Air Force One straight to Russia on a high-stakes diplomatic mission to negotiate with Petrov and free the activist Michael Corrigan. Meanwhile, in a parallel plot, the hacker Gavin, using the alias Max, has infiltrated a church group to find Rachel. He has an emotional breakdown when a young woman named Lisa tries to be nice to him, showing that the guy is at his breaking point. In Russia, Claire visits Corrigan in prison, and things get complicated. The condition for his release is that he make a public apology. Corrigan refuses. He will only leave if Russia changes its homophobic laws. At an impasse, Claire takes a radical step and decides to lock herself in the cell with him until they resolve the situation. In a private conversation, Petrov admits to Frank that even he doesn't like these laws, which affect his own family, but he must maintain them for tradition's sake. Later, Corrigan unburdens himself to Claire, saying his own marriage is over and suggesting hers is on the same path. Tragedy strikes while Claire is taking a nap. At the press conference, the shock is still written all over Claire's face. When it's her turn to speak, she throws the script out the window. Instead of sticking to the plan, she denounces Russia's laws in front of everyone and walks away, leaving Frank looking stunned. Obviously, Petrov is furious and cancels all agreements. The flight back on Air Force One becomes the stage for a monumental fight between Frank and Claire. Frank and Claire renew their wedding vows, a scene of peace. But hold on, rewind. A month earlier, the White House is colder than Petrov's heart. The Russia incident has left deep scars, and their relationship is hanging by a thread. Frank even complains that she flinches when he gets close for a photo. While the couple is in crisis, Tibetan monks visit the White House to create a sand mandala, one of those incredibly intricate works of art that are destroyed at the end, highly symbolic of the moment, right? At the same time, Claire is trying to save her peace resolution at the UN, and Frank's enemies in Congress are trying to block funding for America Works. In another time jump, we meet Thomas Yates, a writer who has become Frank's new best friend. And the hacker Gavin? He finally finds Rachel in New Mexico, and Stamper, obsessed as ever, immediately prepares to go after her. The turning point comes when Frank visits a memorial and has an epiphany. He sees that the statues of President Franklin and his wife Eleanor are separated by a wall, and it hits him hard. Inspired, he gives Claire carte blanche to use international aid money to buy Zimbabwe's support and pass her resolution. From that point on, the two begin to reconnect. In a candid conversation, Yates confesses that his most famous book is a fraud, and Frank admits he's never felt good enough for Claire. In the end, the monks destroy the mandala, and Frank sends a photo to Claire with a note: "Nothing is forever, except us." They finally make peace and fall asleep in each other's arms. Mother Nature has decided to throw a party on the East Coast, and Frank Underwood is not invited. A devastating hurricane is on its way, and the president is caught between a rock and a hard place. Remember that jobs program, America Works? To fund it, Frank cleaned out the coffers of the Disaster Relief Fund. Now, with the storm of the century at the door, there's no money to help anyone, and the risk of thousands of deaths falls squarely on his shoulders. Congress, smelling blood in the water, makes an indecent proposal. They'll replenish the emergency fund, but in return, Frank has to sign a bill that basically buries America Works forever. It's the biggest political blackmail of the season. Meanwhile, in the presidential race, Frank's rivals, Heather Dunbar and Jackie, team up to take advantage of the crisis and suspend their campaigns, leaving Frank even more isolated. In the midst of the chaos, Claire manages to get her peace mission in the Jordan Valley approved, and Frank, even without congressional support, decides to send American troops there. The writer Yates, who is documenting America Works, already sees his job going down the drain. But it's not all bad news. Freddie, of rib joint fame, gets a job at the White House thanks to the program. In the end, with no other way out, Frank yields to the pressure and signs the bill. America Works is dead, but the hurricane funds are released. The irony? The hurricane veers off course and never makes landfall. Despite this huge defeat, Frank calls Yates and tells him he's not giving up and will run for re-election because he refuses to see the impossible as impossible. Frank has barely begun his campaign in Iowa with fiery speeches about the now defunct America Works when his phone rings with a bombshell. 8 Russian soldiers have been killed in the Jordan Valley. He drops everything and rushes back to Washington because the international crisis has just been dialed up to 11. The situation in the Middle East descends into chaos. Israel wants to blame Palestine, Russia blames the US, and President Petrov refuses to cooperate with the investigation. Meanwhile, the characters' personal lives are also unraveling. Doug receives the news, false though he doesn't know it, that Rachel is dead, and the result is predictable. He starts drinking heavily and has a total breakdown. Remy and Jackie meet, and it's clear their old flame still burns. Claire, playing detective, meets with the Russian ambassador and hears the gossip of the century. Russia itself may have staged the explosion to sabotage the peace mission. With this suspicion in hand, Frank authorizes a high-risk special ops mission, like something out of Call of Duty, to find out the truth. Before that, Doug, completely drunk, bursts into the Oval Office to tell Frank about Rachel. Frank, instead of helping, uses his friend's relapse to threaten his rival Dunbar, blaming her for Doug's state. As expected, the secret mission goes horribly wrong and is aborted. To make matters worse, video of the operation leaks to the Israelis. Petrov calls Frank, basically rubbing the victory in his face. Frank, furious, hangs up. The peace operation in the Jordan Valley is officially in ruins. The Jordan Valley has become a powder keg. Claire tries to put out the fire between Israel and Palestine, but Israel imposes a no-fly zone, complicating everything. On the campaign trail, Frank is bombarded with questions about the failed mission and tries to postpone a debate, but Jackie is already doubting whether it's worth staying in the presidential race. Meanwhile, the writer Yates has decided to become an investigative journalist and starts digging into Frank's past. He even arranges a meeting with Claire to get her side of the story. Doug Stamper, for his part, tries to reconnect with a normal life and invites his brother's family for a visit. Desperate for a quick victory to save his campaign, Frank makes a radical decision. He will meet personally with Petrov in the Jordan Valley. He informs Claire that her peace plan is dead. The meeting is a complete disaster. Petrov humiliates Frank, demanding an end to the peace mission, defense concessions, and, the cherry on top, Claire's dismissal as ambassador. He even boasts about how easily he manipulated Claire. Frank, with no bargaining power, accepts everything. Later, Frank and Yates have a booze-fueled conversation that gets strangely intimate, with Frank appearing to be drawn to the writer before sending him home. As for Claire, after all the humiliation, she is ordered to change her image to help her husband's campaign, and surprisingly, she agrees to do whatever it takes. While Claire campaigns for Frank, he is behind the scenes, sharpening his claws for a debate. The strategy? Use Jackie as a pawn to attack the others. Jackie dislikes the idea but ends up agreeing, feeling she has little choice. In the midst of all this, the writer, Yates, desperately tries to speak with Claire, but she ignores him like a telemarketing call. Speaking of bombshells, Gavin reappears and drops one. Rachel isn't dead. He offers her location in exchange for a friend's freedom. Stamper, who was on the verge of succumbing to the temptation to drink again, manages to hold on by a thread. He's living proof that willpower sometimes wins. Before the debate, Jackie tries one last gambit. She proposes an alliance with Dunbar to take Frank out of the game. But Dunbar doesn't promise her any position, and the Powerpuff Girls versus Evil plan falls flat. At the debate, things get ugly. Jackie does her part and attacks Dunbar, as agreed, but Frank, in a move worthy of a soap opera villain, turns the tables and attacks Jackie's family, a major low blow. He wins the debate, but leaves Jackie absolutely furious, and when she confronts him, he basically says, "Your problem." To complete the cycle of disasters, Yates finally corners Claire while she's donating blood. It's in this moment of vulnerability that she unburdens herself. She says she reevaluates their marriage every 7 years and that she hates the loss of freedom. The conversation is so intense that she faints.
How much do I need us?
Mrs. Underwood?
Seeing her world crumble, Jackie drops out of the race and endorses Dunbar, and Remy also quits. Frank's house of cards begins to wobble. Dunbar is leading in the polls, and Frank, feeling the pressure, asks Claire to take a more prominent role in the campaign. After all, the public likes her more than him, which comes as no surprise. Meanwhile, the writer, Yates, sends the first chapter of the book he was writing about them. The problem? The chapter is a complete expose of their marriage. Frank goes into panic mode, cancels the book, and threatens Yates to ensure he doesn't publish anything. In another corner of the ring, Dunbar decides it's time to play dirty. She offers $2 million for the compromising information Stamper has on Claire. With this weapon in hand, she confronts Frank and gives him 3 days to drop out of the race. Frank's reaction is pure, unadulterated villainy. He tells her, "Now you're one of us," almost admiring his opponent's audacity. Claire's campaign also hits a few bumps. During a media event at the home of a supposed supporter, the woman reveals in front of everyone that she actually prefers Dunbar. It's a total PR disaster, but Claire, with the elegance of a queen, enters the house, speaks with the woman, and turns the tables so effectively that the woman ends up saying Claire is the one who should be president. Stamper finally returns to Frank's team. As proof of his loyalty, he burns the diary page containing the secret about Claire's the price, the position of chief of staff, which Frank grants on the spot. To close the episode with even more tension, Frank lies in a TV interview, claiming it was Claire's decision to leave her post as ambassador. Claire hears the lie, and we can see on her face that her patience with her husband has finally run out. Meanwhile, Rachel, now going by the name Lisa, works multiple jobs and is saving up cash to buy another fake ID. But there's no escaping her past, and it goes by the name of Doug Stamper. He tracks down Gavin, gives him a serious beating, and drags Rachel's location out of him. The hunt is relentless. Doug finds her, knocks her out with chloroform, and throws her into the back of a van. He drives to the middle of the New Mexico desert and starts digging a grave. For a moment, it seems Rachel manages to get through to him. He stops, gives her water and food, and tells her to start walking toward a nearby town. He gets in the van and starts driving in the opposite direction, but in a dark twist, he changes his mind, makes a U-turn, and the scene cuts. We don't see it, but it's heavily implied that he runs her over and buries her in the grave he dug. Game over for Rachel. Meanwhile, the Underwood marriage is imploding. After Frank's victory in Iowa, he returns to Washington and finds Claire in the Oval Office. He demands that she join him on the campaign trail. She, with the calm of someone who has already made a decision, lights a cigarette and says their marriage has been unfair, that she has sacrificed all her dreams for his. Frank argues that they built everything together, but she counters, saying it has always been his decisions, his goals. The final straw was realizing she only got the UN job because of him. The fight gets ugly. He calls her selfish and says she's nothing without him. The next day, as they are about to leave for the campaign, Frank waits for her. Claire appears and delivers the line that seals the fate of everything. "I'm leaving you."
Yes, you are. I'll see you in the car.
I'm leaving you.
Claire.
In prison, we see former journalist Lucas Goodwin on a bunk bed, telling a rather daring story to his cellmate. The camera pans down to show the guy, relieving himself, and at the end he says, "Damn, you're good with words." Yeah, the guy's talent for storytelling serves multiple purposes. Cut to Frank Underwood, rehearsing his campaign speech. Doug is by his side, but Frank only cares about one thing. Where's Claire? Upon discovering she's gone to Texas, he's furious and has to rewrite the speech as it mentioned his wife. Later, he delivers the presentation in a warehouse and is applauded, but we know his head is somewhere else. Meanwhile, Claire arrives at her mother's house in Dallas. She knocks on the bedroom door, but her mother, Mistress Hale, deliberately ignores her. The family tension is palpable. Back on the campaign trail, the press, including Seth, questions Claire's absence. Frank, a master of deflection, dodges the questions and focuses on his plans. In prison, we discover that Lucas's conversation is being recorded by the FBI. Soon after, he's released and placed in the witness protection program. At night, Frank asks his security agent Meacham to stay with him for a while. The president ends up falling asleep and has a bizarre nightmare where he and Claire try to kill each other. In Texas, Claire meets with Congresswoman Doris Jones, who plans to retire and wants her daughter Celia to take her place. Claire, who never misses an opportunity, tries to convince Celia to wait, as she wants the seat herself to gain leverage for a future gubernatorial run. But her plan is sabotaged by Frank and Doug, who even threaten her new campaign manager, Leanne Harvey. To make matters worse, Frank reveals that Claire's mother's cancer has returned and convinces her to use it as a public excuse. In return, he promises not to interfere with her plans anymore. In the end, Frank loses the New Hampshire primary, and Claire's mother lays it on the line for her daughter. You have to put him in his place. Claire decides she's not going to stand by idly and goes on the offensive to secure the congressional seat, putting her on a direct collision course with Frank. Things are so serious that even her mother, Elizabeth, gets in on the action and starts asking friends to secretly donate to Dunbar's campaign, Frank's main rival. It's friendly fire all around. Frank, feeling the pressure, makes last-minute changes to his State of the Union address. Then, in front of the entire country, he drops a bombshell. He announces he will fully fund Doris Jones's health center and, for good measure, declares his full support for her daughter, Celia, to take the seat. With a single move, he essentially blows up Claire's plan on national television, leaving her with no shot. While the domestic drama unfolds, the international scene is also heating up. In the Situation Room, Frank learns that the Russian president, Viktor Petrov, has been eliminating his political rivals. To complicate matters, a Russian businessman requests asylum in the US. Frank calls Petrov, who accuses him of being behind a coup attempt. The problems just keep piling up. Far from all this power struggle, we see Lucas Goodwin being released from prison. He enters the witness protection program and settles into an apartment with a new identity, ready for a fresh start. Back to the main drama. Claire and her mother have an ugly fight over campaign money. The argument gets so heated that Claire threatens to sell a family property that's in her name, showing she's willing to do anything to avoid losing this war against her own husband. Frank heads to his hometown in South Carolina in full campaign mode. He gives a speech at a predominantly black church alongside Doris and Celia, talking about poverty and the rising price of gas, a crisis caused by Russia. Claire shows up supposedly to help, but Frank doesn't trust her one bit. He prefers to focus on securing Doris and Celia's support, posting them at his home. That's when the game changes. Leanne, Claire's campaign manager, gains access to the Underwood safe, and the malicious plan is set in motion. Out of nowhere, a massive billboard appears showing Frank's father standing next to a hooded figure from a notorious hate group. The scandal explodes, and Frank's team scrambles to do damage control. Frank returns to the same church to explain himself, but the situation only worsens when Seth, his press secretary, leaks another compromising photo of him with a Confederate soldier reenactor. The result is disastrous. Frank loses the South Carolina primary. Devastated by the defeat, Frank finds Claire's earrings in the safe, and it finally clicks. It was her. Claire orchestrated the entire scandal. She explains she did it to wake him up, to show him his campaign was sinking and that he desperately needed her. Then, she plays her final card, the demand that changes everything. She doesn't just want a congressional seat, she wants to be his running mate as the vice presidential candidate. Frank, shocked and furious, finds the proposal utterly absurd, setting the stage for the couple's next major battle. In the Situation Room, Frank Underwood and his military advisors are cooking up a high-stakes plan to corner Russia, using a man named Milken as bait. It's a game of grandmaster-level political chess. Secretary Durant hates the idea and warns that Russia could retaliate with full force, but Frank pays her no mind. He simply tells everyone to proceed with the plan and then signs the papers, ignoring her protests. Classic Frank being Frank. Meanwhile, his campaign is not going well. A crowd is protesting and chanting Blunderwood, a mix of blunder and his surname. Frank first gives a speech to his supporters, and then, in an attempt to look brave, he goes outside to face the protesters. Bad idea. A man named Lucas Goodwin pulls a gun and shoots the president twice. His security agent, Meacham, manages to take down the shooter, but is killed in the process. It's total chaos, and Frank is rushed to the hospital in critical condition. With the president out of commission, the vice president, Donald Blythe, takes over as acting president. The problem is, the guy is more indecisive than a soap opera character torn between two lovers. He needs to decide whether to continue or abort Frank's crazy operation against Russia, and simply freezes. That's when Stamper calls the only person who can fix this mess, Claire. With her help, Blythe makes a decision. Instead of following the original plan, he orders the plane carrying Milken to land in China. It seems that even with Frank in the hospital, and Underwood is still running the White House. The shock of the assassination attempt hasn't even subsided, and there's already another bombshell. The FBI informs Stamper that the shooter, Lucas, left a suicide note that is essentially a dossier against Frank. In the note, he accuses the president of murdering Zoe Barnes and Peter Russo back in season 1. The worst part is, the note is now evidence and can't be suppressed. Stamper rushes to tell Claire everything. Meanwhile, acting President Blythe is about to have a call with Petrov, the Russian leader, and he's freaking out. He asks Claire for help, She offers to stay in the room, but Blythe says Durant wouldn't like that. The solution? Claire becomes a sort of human earpiece, secretly texting him what to say during the call. Blythe even plays the Frank might not survive card to see if Petrov will soften. It's basically a puppet show with the fate of the world at stake. To calm the media, Claire holds a press conference, stating that Frank's health is improving and painting Lucas's accusations as the delusions of a mentally ill man. A journalist, Kate Baldwin, tries to investigate, but Lucas's former editor doesn't buy the story either. In reality, Frank's health is dire. He's suffering from hallucinations, and the doctors give an ultimatum. He needs a liver transplant immediately, or it's over. Claire is now the one calling the shots. She has crafted a complex economic plan involving the US, Russia, and China, and acting President Blythe is completely on board. He even wants to present the plan at the G7 summit. Durant, the Secretary of State, is furious with Claire's influence, but Blythe brushes her off and adds the First Lady to the official delegation. The Russian President Petrov refuses to negotiate with Durant and demands to speak with Claire. She doesn't hold back. She calls him a beggar and tells him he'll have to take whatever she offers. The nerve! On another corner of the board, rival candidate Dunbar gets into hot water when she admits to meeting with the shooter, Lucas. She tries to use this to attack Frank, but it backfires, and her campaign goes down in flames. At the same time, the team discovers that the Republican candidate, Conway, is manipulating online search results to appear more popular, a digital cheat that could be decisive, but Claire is too busy solving world problems to worry about it. Stamper, ever loyal, uses his subtle methods to intimidate the Secretary of Health and ensure Frank is at the top of the liver transplant list. While waiting, Frank has hallucinations of his victims, Zoe and Russo. Salvation comes in the most tragic way possible. A teenager commits suicide and his liver is a match. Frank undergoes the surgery and, as soon as he can speak, is transferred back to the White House. There, he pleads with Claire, "Stay with me." She agrees, but on one condition: things will be different. He consents, and his first act is to sign the international agreement she orchestrated. The Underwoods are back, but now the power is shared.
It would have to be different.
Dunbar throws in the towel and drops out of the race, making Frank the final boss on the Democratic side. Without wasting any time, he manipulates Blythe out of the way and has his team start vetting a new VP. Meanwhile, Claire decides it's time to get in the game and goes to the press to talk about gun control. Following Frank's advice, she goes after Julia, an NRA representative, and mercilessly tears the woman apart in a calculated attack. In parallel, we have journalist Tom Hammerschmidt, who still has a bad feeling about Lucas's death. He seeks out Janine Skorsky, who confirms his suspicions, showing that this story is far from over. On the other side of the ring, the Republican challenger emerges, Conway, the governor of New York. The guy is a post-9/11 Air Force veteran, basically the Captain America of politics, and he's ahead of Frank in the polls. To make matters worse, he's using a search engine called Polyhop to spy on the electorate, like a real-life cheat code. Stamper tries to expose the scheme, but Leanne has a darker idea: use the threat of a terrorist group, ICO, as an excuse to get authorization for domestic surveillance. Conway, in a masterstroke, goes live, admits to using Polyhop, and, unbelievably, his poll numbers skyrocket. Claire then convinces Frank to abort a military strike against ICO and use Leanne's dirty plan instead. Later, the Underwoods watch an old recording of themselves with the Conways and make a pact. They will destroy their rivals together.
Going to destroy them.
Yes, we are.
The Conways try to pull a fast one on the Underwoods, offering to help Yates get his book published through their contacts at Vanity Fair. But Claire is quicker on the draw. She calls Yates in for a chat and makes a counteroffer. He becomes her speechwriter, and in return, she brings him back into the fold to finish the book however he wants. Naturally, he accepts the Underwoods' offer. Meanwhile, Frank meets with Dean Austin, the party's favorite to be his VP. Little does Austin know he's about to walk into a trap. Aiden, the data scientist, secretly passes a list of names and phone numbers to Leanne, who anonymously leaks it to the gun control lobby. With the list in hand, Claire records a highly emotional video asking people to call their senators. The result? 84,000 calls in under 24 hours. Frank uses this pressure to intimidate Austin, forcing him to support Claire's bill. This torches his reputation with the NRA and destroys any chance he had of becoming VP. On the other side, Conway offers General Brockhart the VP spot on his ticket, ticket if he resigns. Brockhart agrees, and they schedule a photo shoot with Vanity Fair to announce the new duo. To cap it off, Hammerschmidt continues his investigation and uncovers a small but curious clue. Meacham, the Underwoods' former bodyguard, used to frequent a pizza place near Zoe's old apartment. The devil is in the details. We arrive at the Democratic National Convention, and the selection of Frank's running mate becomes a political free-for-all, with an open floor vote. Durant starts with a lead, but Leanne, the Underwoods' miracle worker, springs into action and convinces Celia Jones to use Texas's votes to back Claire. As if that weren't enough, the Underwoods make a master move. They offer the position of Secretary of State to both Durant and Baker in exchange for their support for Claire. A double promise, and a problem for whoever believes it. Meanwhile, Conway appears on TV demanding an apology for General Brockhart and for Frank to do something about the terrorist group, ICO. Frank's response is pure cunning. He apologizes publicly and invites Conway to a private meeting. In the meeting, the two men size each other up like a pair of sharks, but say absolutely nothing about ICO. The convention vote resumes, and then comes the plot twist. Louisiana votes for Durant, but for president in an attempt to oust Frank. And to throw more fuel on the fire, Conway reveals that Durant contacted him to orchestrate this betrayal. Frank has just been stabbed in the back. In the midst of the chaos, Claire, unruffled, packs her things and heads to Texas with Yates, ready to write her acceptance speech. The woman is focused on the prize, no matter the fire raging around her.
Now it's time for me to be his partner in the White House for the next 4.
We can do better.
An early morning news article praises Claire for her role in the G7 summit with Russia while painting Durant as useless. Frank announces he's returning to Washington to deal with an advance by ICO. On Air Force One, he and Durant have a chat, and she basically blackmails him. Either he makes Claire endorse her for vice president, or she'll turn the convention into absolute chaos. Meanwhile, Claire visits her mother, Elizabeth, who is now receiving palliative care at home. Their relationship remains more tense than a violin string, but Yates, the writer, and Elizabeth hit it off immediately. The nurse mentions she can give Elizabeth medication to make her comfortable and allow for a peaceful death. Without a second thought, Claire helps her mother take a massive dose of the drugs, and she passes away peacefully soon after. Later, the camera shows Claire and Yates in an intimate moment, and in the next scene, waking up in the same bed. She's moved on quickly. Elsewhere, Leanne confronts Stamper, telling him he can search all he wants but won't find any dirt on her. Stamper then goes after Seth, who initially resists, but eventually agrees to a meeting where they all decide it's time to work together. Frank and Durant continue their argument in the car and in the Situation Room. Claire begins to doubt the plan and suggests it might be better to let Durant win the VP slot, but Frank is stubborn and insists on pushing forward. To settle the score, he dredges up the rumors about Zoe and Russo to intimidate Durant and force her to hand her delegates to Claire. Checkmate. After experiencing some pain on Air Force One, Frank receives doctor's orders. He can only fly once a week during his recovery. The solution? Claire will continue the campaign solo. She and Yates start working on her speeches, and their affair is back on. Out of nowhere, Yates decides to leave the campaign, and Frank confronts him about it. The bizarre part is that, right after, Frank tells Claire she should bring Yates back on the road with her. What's Frank's angle here? Frank is out for blood against ICO, and orders Durant and Stamper to coordinate the entry of Russian troops into the fight. But Conway, always the spoiler, shows up to ruin their plans. Without Russian help, Frank decides it's time to go on the offensive with American troops. Meanwhile, Stamper receives a voicemail from Laura, the widow of Tony Moretti, to whom he made a donation. He returns the call, and later, the two meet at a restaurant. There's something very strange about this connection. In another storyline, Remy meets Hammerschmidt at the site of Freddy's old barbecue joint. At first, Remy doesn't give anything away, but then they start playing Never Have I Ever, and Remy ends up indirectly confirming all of Frank's crimes. It's the kind of confession you only see in movies. With the ammunition he needs, Hammerschmidt returns to the Washington Herald, ready to drop this bombshell. A debate is underway. Frank and Claire on one side, Conway and Brockhart on the other. Behind the scenes, the data scientist Aiden is running his algorithms to analyze every word spoken. Conway and Brockhart deny Frank's accusation that they blocked the use of Russian troops against ICO. To back up the lie, Stamper pressures a congressman to publicly state that they did, in fact, do it. Politics at its purest. Things get serious when ICO takes 3 hostages, the Miller family. Their demands are steep: withdrawal of American troops, the release of the ICO leader, and, most importantly, they will only negotiate with Conway. Stamper brings the FBI and Homeland Security to Aiden's office, and they use his technology to identify the kidnappers. Frank has no choice but to call Conway in to help with the negotiations, but the crisis remains unresolved. In parallel, Hammerschmidt's investigation moves forward. He tells former President Walker that Frank framed him for impeachment and asks for help to expose everything. Remy and Jackie also meet to discuss the case, and Jackie decides she's going to talk and reveal everything she knows against Frank. The house of cards is collapsing. To close out, Claire asks Stamper to work on a secret plan for the next morning, and while that's pending, he goes home to rest and finds Laura there, cooking him dinner. Their relationship is growing increasingly strange and intimate. The day breaks, and we see Frank acting as a tough negotiator, demanding that the terrorists release the hostages. Meanwhile, Claire is in diplomat mode, having a chat with Yusuf al-Ahmadi, a man who was imprisoned at Guantanamo. The FBI swings into action and manages to rescue the mother and daughter, but the father, James Miller, remains a hostage. Al-Ahmadi promises to help negotiate his release, but at the crucial moment when he calls the kidnappers, he tears up the deal and betrays everyone. A twist worthy of a soap opera. In parallel, a journalist named Hammerschmidt wants an interview with Frank about a bombshell story. Frank, of course, scoffs and dismisses it as tabloid gossip for political purposes. But the journalist isn't intimidated and publishes the story anyway, causing Jackie and Remy to simply vanish off the map like witnesses in a mob movie. To make the Underwood situation worse, the FBI and Homeland Security take control of the surveillance algorithm. Without Aiden and Stamper in charge, their entire illegal election scheme is at risk of being exposed. With her back against the wall, Claire gives Frank the play. Use people's fear to their advantage, and just like that, Frank addresses the nation, preparing everyone for total war against Iko. The final scene is chilling. The Underwoods and the cabinet watch live as James Miller is executed, and to top it off with a golden key, Frank and Claire look directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall and leaving us utterly shocked.
We don't submit to terror. We make the terror.
Claire then records a campaign ad, urging the public to become a kind of informant network and report anything suspicious, its paranoia being weaponized for political gain. Meanwhile, Frank causes a major uproar in Congress. He storms the House floor, snatches the microphone from a congressman, and demands that Congress declare war on Iko. When the Speaker of the House asks him to yield the floor, Frank delivers the iconic line, "I will not yield." The man simply has no limits.
I will not yield.
The mood gets even heavier at Jim Miller's funeral. His daughter, Melissa, blames Frank for her father's death and whispers something in his ear. Later, Frank tells Claire what she said. "I hope you die and Claire becomes president." Sinister. On a TV show, Claire defends her husband against Hammerschmidt's accusations, saying the declaration of war is necessary, not a distraction. At the same time, the campaign of his rival, Conway, begins to implode when his wife says that the terrorist Masterson's mother is also a victim, creating a public relations nightmare. Claire, of course, takes advantage of the situation and goes to speak with the terrorist's mother, asking her to convince her son to surrender. But not everything is rosy. During a press conference, a man calls Claire a war and throws paint on her. The manhunt for the terrorist Masterson heats up, but then comes the twist. He had already been captured by Frank himself, who was holding him in a secret location and orders his execution. The next day, Frank blatantly lies to the press, saying Masterson was killed during his capture. In the end, the Underwood couple appears in public, posing as saviors and telling the people there is nothing to fear.
You have nothing to be afraid of.
This time, it's Claire in the crosshairs. At an event in New York, a man named Kim Caswell confronts her about an old friend of Frank's, Tim Corbett, who disappeared and is presumed dead, another skeleton tumbling out of the Underwood's closet. Meanwhile, Frank is playing the gracious host at a lunch for governors. The excuse is to strengthen the fight against terror, but the truth is, he needs to secure the support of 5 crucial states for the election. And guess who's there? Jim Matthews, a familiar face from the past. Claire decides to extend her stay in New York, and the Vice President, Donald Blythe, fills in for her. Secretary Durant voices her opposition to Frank's war, but Blythe, pragmatically, thinks it's a great political move, as Frank's popularity is on the rise. Now, things get serious. Aidan McCallan needs to breach a telecommunications center to erase all evidence linking him, along with the President and First Lady, to the illegal surveillance scheme. He has a window of only 20 minutes before the NSA catches him. The tension is maxed out. Aidan initiates the hack, and suddenly, Washington Washington, D.C. experiences a complete digital blackout. Cell phones, Wi-Fi, GPS, TV, everything goes down. Frank, master manipulator, goes on air immediately, blames ICO for the cyber attack, and uses the chaos to pressure Congress to fast-track his declaration of war. Meanwhile, his rival Conway is trying to have a normal life, taking his kids trick-or-treating for Halloween, but the massive military presence on the streets causes him to have a meltdown live on air. The final scene? Frank and Claire watching their adversary's downfall, toast to victory, classic Underwood. On the eve of the election, Conway decides to become a 24-hour streamer, hosting a live Skype session with voters. The vibe is all peace and love until someone from his past sends a question about his time in the military. His wife, Hannah, cuts the conversation short, saying Will is too humble to talk about it. Basically a shut up before you ruin everything move. Meanwhile, Frank and Claire are on the campaign trail, but Frank's voice is shot. Even so, he refuses to stop, since Conway is chattering away non-stop on the internet. Doug, Frank's right-hand man, goes to collect from Governor Matthews, who had promised help in exchange for some favors, but the governor plays dumb, and Doug realizes the man can't be trusted. In Washington, Kathy warns Frank about a Syrian terrorist with ICO connections, a man named Mohammed Kalabi. The intel is great, but it arrives on the eve of the election. Frank is pissed, like, "You're seriously only telling me this now?" That night, a curious scene. Claire and Frank have a chat in the residence, while the writer Tom Yates sleeps soundly in the bed. Totally normal. To steal Conway's thunder, Frank calls into his live stream and challenges him. Conway, thinking he's clever, asks why Frank didn't let him rescue the hostage, Mr. Miller. Frank fires back, saying the terrorist realized Conway was weak, which is why he had to take control. A true verbal fatality. Election day arrives, and Frank's call becomes the day's headline. But as Frank and Claire watch an old movie in the White House theater, a ritual of theirs, they receive terrible news. Voter turnout is extremely low. Still, Frank is unfazed and states the reality, "We're not going anywhere." The movie Frank and Claire were watching ends, but they've already left the room to do damage control on the low voter turnout. Meanwhile, Conway gets the news that the low turnout plays in his favor. He and his wife celebrate in a very intimate way. Hannah even calls him Mr. President. Way to jinx it, huh? Then, the Underwood plan begins. Frank calls the governor of Tennessee and says the White House has raided the home of a terror suspect, the one from the previous episode, and found bomb-making materials. He creates a panic, saying an attack could happen at any moment at polling stations, and as if by magic, a bomb actually explodes at a polling center in Tennessee, injuring several people and throwing all the emerging results into chaos. With chaos unleashed, Frank convinces the governor to declare a state of emergency and a curfew. Conway is furious, watching his plan go down the drain. The governor of Ohio does the same, while Frank plays innocent. And then the 4D chess move. Frank calls Conway to concede, but it's a trick. With states withholding their results due to the threats, the election is left in limbo, with no winner. To top it all off, a flashback shows Frank and Claire discussing an even more ambitious plan, to abolish term limits so they can stay in power forever. These two don't mess around. 9 weeks have passed since the election that never ended. People are on the streets protesting in front of the White House. Frank explains the constitutional mess. Since no one won, the House of Representatives chooses the president and the Senate chooses the vice president. Each state gets 1 vote and the first to 26 wins. Meanwhile, Conway swears up and down that the election was his. Frank, in the middle of the crisis, finds time to meet with Eric, an actor who participated in that Civil War reenactment. A super random meeting. Leanne brings in the numbers, and they're not good. Frank's approval has plummeted to 19%. Claire's, however, is at 30%. The Democrats are panicking about the possibility of a split ticket. Conway as president and Claire as vice president, which would be total chaos. But Claire argues it's better to have a Democrat in there to balance things out. Speaking of Claire, she finds out Tom is at a bar with another woman and, in a fit of jealousy, has the Secret Service send her a video of the scene. Elsewhere, the journalist Hammerschmidt finds a former girlfriend of Rachel's who has bombshell information about Doug. And as if that weren't enough, Aiden, the missing hacker, calls Liam threatening to leak the Underwood's dirt if they don't get the authorities off his back. On voting day, Claire tries to convince Vice President Blythe to block a Republican maneuver. He refuses, and she loses her patience, even insulting his late wife. Blythe, colder than ice, responds with a venomous jab, insinuating that her initials, CU, would be more complete with a certain very offensive word. The House vote ends in a tie, neither Frank nor Conway. This means the Senate's choice for vice president, either Claire or or her rival will become the acting president. The Underwood plan is about to take a giant leap forward. Claire Underwood is the boss now. She takes over as acting president of the United States until Congress decides who gets the seat for good. Frank, with that poker face of his, says he's proud and that she deserves it. Yeah, right, Frank. But the peace is short-lived. Kathy Durant arrives with news that a research base in Antarctica has been invaded by mysterious soldiers. The suspicion falls on the Russians, but no one is sure of anything. To make matters worse, the Black Caucus is thinking of jumping ship from Frank and supporting Conway. Things are getting ugly. While Frank and Claire are on the phone trying to sort things out with the Russian president, the hacker Aidan McCallan is kidnapped. If he talks, all the Underwood's dirty secrets will come out. It's the perfect recipe for disaster. Claire, showing who's in charge, suggests new elections in the states with issues, even against Frank's wishes. Meanwhile, Conway tries to meet with the Black Caucus, but the meeting is a complete fiasco. On the plane back, he freaks out at the pilot and screams that he's going to be president in a tantrum worthy of a movie villain. In the midst of the chaos, the journalist Hammerschmidt continues his investigation, digging into the late Zoe Barnes's affairs. To avoid a split government, Frank and Claire convince Conway's team to support new elections. At the end of the day, we find out it was indeed the Russians who nabbed Aidan, and Frank, he ends the episode lying on the bedroom floor, feeling useless, while Claire simply walks out and leaves him there, proving that power now has a new name.
Could you give me a moment? It's been a difficult few days.
The Underwoods' lovers' quarrel kicks off early, with Frank and Claire arguing about a meeting with a guy named Usher, but there's no time for a couple's spat because duty calls. In the Situation Room, they receive a briefing on a terrorist, the brother of an ICO leader. The generals are undecided: strike now or wait to see if he leads them to more people. Meanwhile, journalist Hammerschmidt is getting closer to the truth, connecting Doug's carjacking to Rachel's last known address. The walls are closing in. Suddenly, chaos. A truck carrying radioactive material vanishes off the map. Highest security alert. Claire, Kathy, and a mysterious new figure, Jane Davis, are rushed to a bunker. Frank shows up shortly after. The possibility of a Chernobyl-level terrorist attack sends everyone into a panic. In the middle of the crisis, Doug gets his hands on a compromising recording of General Brockhart, Conway's VP, saying he would order his soldiers to disobey the president. It's pure gold. Frank, despite being out of office, sniffs out the betrayal and discovers that one of the generals who wanted to evacuate the city is a buddy of Brockhart's. Luckily for everyone, the truck is found. It was just a false alarm, but the betrayal doesn't go unnoticed. Claire, with her usual coldness, forces the general's resignation, and he leaves cursing out the Underwoods. The next day, Frank and Claire host Usher in the Oval Office and, ever so casually, play the recording of Brockhart. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife, and we cut to a forest filled with hooded men worshipping a giant owl statue. And who's right in the middle of it? Frank Underwood, of course. He's at this secret retreat to secure support from powerful people like Raymond Tusk and Mark Usher for the new elections. While Frank is at his Illuminati summer camp, Claire is woken up in the middle of the night with a crisis. A Russian research vessel is sinking in Antarctica with over 100 people on board. She and the mysterious Jane Davis spring into action, negotiating a rescue mission with China, as there's supposedly an American on the ship. Claire, however, isn't easily convinced and demands concrete proof that the American is actually there. Back in the forest, Frank finds out his rival, Brockhart, is trying to cut a deal with Tusk. He calls Doug and tells him to be on standby, but not to do anything yet. Classic Frank, always one step ahead. Claire, a born negotiator, strikes a brilliant deal with China. They help with the rescue and take all the credit, and in return, the US gets a better trade agreement. The mission is carried out. China emerges as the hero, but the so-called American is never found. A convenient detail. As Frank is leaving the retreat, he receives a gift, the recording of Conway's meltdown on the plane.
They have a recording of him.
Back in Washington, he and Claire meet with Usher and lay their cards on the table, revealing they have the tape. Usher, no fool, realizes he has no choice and switches sides, joining Team Underwood to plot how to leak the recording and destroy Conway for good. After a crazy election, Frank Underwood finally does it. He is now the president-elect of the United States. His rival, Conway, calls to concede, but not before cursing Frank out. To rub it in, Frank offers him a useless little post, just for the humiliation. Shortly after, Frank and Claire pop a bottle of champagne in the Oval Office to celebrate their victory. The next day, Frank decides to keep his entire former cabinet in an if it ain't broke, don't fix it vibe. He also thanks Claire for her work as acting president, but it's not all roses. Doug, the loyal henchman, already smells trouble. He thinks bringing Mark Usher into the administration is a terrible idea, and that Leanne must be fired, since her connection to the hacker Aidan McCowan is a ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, Leanne doesn't wait to be pushed out. She has lunch with journalist Kate Baldwin and leaks her own firing, explaining the reason is Aidan, who stole NSA files and might leak everything to Russia. Elsewhere, Tom, Claire's writer, lover, quits. To make matters worse, Congressman Alex Romero resorts to blackmail. Either he gets 2 VIP seats at the inauguration and a mention in Frank's speech, or he reopens the war crimes investigation against the Underwoods. Frank is inaugurated, gives his speech, and completely ignores Romero. In Russia, Aidan is about to be interviewed by Kate Baldwin, but Leanne calls in a panic, warning him that the police are at his door. During the inaugural ball, Frank has an intimate moment with his personal trainer and kisses him. Shortly after, he confronts Tom for betraying Claire. The night ends with Doug finally firing Leanne, and with Frank and Claire plotting with Jane Davis on how to bring Aidan back to the US. The walls are closing in on Frank. The War Crimes Committee is reopening its investigation, and Jackie has been called to testify. Meanwhile, Claire, colder than the South Pole itself, is informed that an American has died on an expedition in Antarctica, and her order is simple: make the body disappear on its way back. Congressman Romero, now leading the committee, is done negotiating and refuses Frank's offer of an important position. Leanne, now unemployed, is worried about Aidan, but Jane Davis makes it clear that what's important is what he told the Russians. That's when Jane throws a bizarre idea on the table: staging a gas attack in Syria. This would force the committee to focus on the war and forget the investigation into the Underwoods. Frank and Claire consider the proposal, but Secretary Durant is horrified and protests. In parallel, Doug goes back to being the watchdog and intimidates Lisa Williams, who immediately calls journalist Hammerschmidt, and in a soap opera-worthy plot twist, Leanne finds Aidan alive in a parking garage. The moment is tense and brief, and he disappears again. The episode's climax comes with former President Garrett Walker's testimony. Everyone thought he'd stay quiet, but he breaks his silence and throws Frank under the bus, revealing that it was Frank who got him into the illegal money scheme with China. To cap off the night of disasters, Leanne receives a voice recording. Aidan has been found dead in his hotel room from a gunshot to the head. At the same time, we see Jane Davis shredding files on the guy from Antarctica and on Aidan himself, a professional house cleaning. The jig is up. After Garrett Walker's bombshell testimony, the debate rages on TV, with Seth and journalist Hammerschmidt arguing over the ex-president's credibility. In the White House, the word impeachment begins to echo, and Frank's team discusses their options. But the worst is yet to come. Hammerschmidt receives an anonymous leak with devastating information. The White House faked a terrorist threat on Election Day to manipulate the outcome. Frank goes into full Big Brother mode and orders all White House staff to be spied on to find the traitor. Aidan's situation also gets stranger. The FBI tells Leanne his death looks like a suicide, but there's one detail: the murder weapon is missing. In the midst of this chaos, Claire also cleans up her personal life and kicks Tom to the curb, telling him to leave for good. The pressure on Frank mounts when party leaders confront him with a less than friendly suggestion: maybe it's time to consider resigning. Doug, in the middle of his spying, is intrigued by something Leanne received from Aidan. He then goes to Laura Moretti, confesses he caused her husband's death, and, that same night, sleeps with Leanne. Logic? None. A new article explodes in the media, confirming that Frank used questionable intelligence to shut down polling centers. Frank, furious, confronts Kathy Durant, convinced she's the source of the leaks. The tension reaches its peak when the news breaks. Kathy is going to testify before the committee. To close things out, Hammerschmidt receives a birthday card with a computer chip inside. What's on the chip? We only know that things are about to get even uglier. Frank tries to pull a Jedi mind trick on Kathy to stop her from testifying, but the tactic fails miserably. Out of patience, he resorts to Plan B. He simply pushes her down a flight of stairs, calls an ambulance, and pretends it was a tragic accident.
Help! The secretary has fallen!
With Kathy in the hospital, her testimony is off the table. Later, Frank tries to hold a press conference about Syria, but the reporters only want to know about the looming impeachment. The atmosphere gets heavier than a horror movie. To make matters worse, journalist Hammerschmidt is investigating Zoe Barnes' death and has already figured out the accident story doesn't add up. Frank's solution? Pin the whole thing on his loyal right-hand man, Doug. So, Frank and Claire host a sinister little dinner where they try to convince Doug to take the fall for Zoe's murder. It's basically, hey buddy, how about you go to prison for us? Doug is uncomfortable, but later goes to Leanne and confesses to the crime, though she doesn't buy it. Meanwhile, Hammerschmidt is receiving anonymous tips on birthday cards. And guess who has a collection of those cards? Doug himself. Claire also gets herself into trouble. She finds out that Tom, her writer lover, included all the dirty secrets she confessed to him in his book, including the murders. Frank is pissed about her screw-up. Claire confronts Tom, but he blackmails her. They have one last night together, and out of nowhere, Tom dies of poisoning. Yes, Claire has become the Black Widow of politics. In the end, ignoring all advice, Frank goes before the committee, delivers an Oscar-worthy speech, denies everything, but announces he will resign to protect the presidency. Claire is furious that Frank resigned without consulting her, but he, always 10 steps ahead, reveals his grand plan. He'll go to the private sector, and she'll stay in the White House, controlling everything together, like Marvel villains. Frank confesses that he was the leaker, working with Doug all along, and now he needs Claire to pardon him, along with Doug. Meanwhile, the transition of power begins. Claire fires Seth and promotes Leanne to chief of staff. Frank finally signs his resignation, and Claire is sworn in as the new president of the United States.
Constitution of the United States. So help me
Here
God.
we are again. Maybe I love power more.
And her term starts with a bang, with a chemical attack crisis in Syria that might have Russian involvement. The first order of business is to kick Frank out of the White House because having the ex-president in his pajamas wandering the halls doesn't look good. Frank gets pissed and, in an act of pure rebellion, puts out a cigarette on the American flag in the Oval Office. He finds out Claire is indeed going to authorize an attack in Syria, and that all the evidence against him is in her hands. She promises to announce his pardon after a speech to the nation. The attack is a success. Claire goes on TV, announces the victory, and sends a venomous jab at Frank, talking about governments that use their citizens as pawns. But the most important part, the pardon, she simply skips. Frank watches it all on TV, seething with rage. With protests outside, White House security is tightened. Frank calls desperately, but Claire ignores the call. She looks directly at the camera and says, "My turn."
My turn.
100 days later, Claire's presidency is a mess. Her approval ratings are in the toilet, and death threats are flooding social media. Oh, and one minor detail, Frank died mysteriously in the meantime. Claire's new beef is with the Shepard siblings, a pair of billionaires who used to bankroll Frank and now want her to play their game by passing a deregulation bill. But Claire, who doesn't take orders from anyone, goes public and does the exact opposite, challenging her new enemies. The response is swift. On the way back to the White House, a sniper fires at the presidential car. The bullet hits the armored glass right next to her, a clear warning that these people aren't playing around. This attack makes Claire connect the dots and start to wonder if Frank's mysterious death was, in fact, a murder. She shares her suspicions with an FBI agent. Meanwhile, far from Washington, Doug Stamper is still checked into a psychiatric clinic, insisting he was the one who killed Zoe Barnes. He spends his days confessing the crime to his therapist, playing the victim. But then comes the soap opera-worthy plot twist. His therapist is secretly working for Claire, recording every word and spying on Doug's every move. The new president's web just keeps getting bigger. Things start to heat up when a Shepard-owned factory in Bellport leaks some nasty chemicals. Claire, nobody's fool, blackmails the governor into declaring a state of emergency. Her move? Touring the city, talking to the affected residents, and publicly shaming the Shepard family for all to see, like an influencer visiting a disaster zone. Meanwhile, Seth Grayson, who now works for the Shepards, is trying to get people to download a mobile app. It seems harmless, but the app, managed by Annette's son, Duncan, is basically a pocket-sized spy, designed to steal everyone's data. And speaking of turning the tables, Doug Stamper calls the Attorney General to retract his confession and cut a deal to go after Claire. The stage is set for a showdown. To make matters worse, Claire herself shows up at his house with a mafia-style proposal to make Kathy Durant disappear, who remains a loose end, but Doug refuses. In the end, Bill Shepard threatens Claire using the contents of Frank's will, which he's trying to keep under lock and key. Pressured, Claire has no choice and ends up signing the bill Bill wanted. Score 1 for the Shepherds. Out of nowhere, Judge Abruzzo shows up in the Oval Office demanding a Supreme Court seat, piling on the stress for Claire. She's already fed up with the Shepherds trying to sabotage her administration at every turn. Worried that Kathy Durant might talk under Bill Shepard's influence, Claire meets with her and then asks Doug to prevent her testimony. Basically, I handle this for me. Meanwhile, journalist Tom Hammerschmidt, who never lets go, is frustrated that Frank's mysterious death isn't being properly investigated and goes after Doug. And there's more high-level gossip. Vice President Mark Usher is having a secret affair with Annette, but she's the one calling the shots. Claire decides she wants to speak directly with Annette, no intermediaries. In their conversation, Annette tries to push Judge Abruzzo, but Claire counters with some hot gossip about her son Duncan. There's even a flashback showing them as young women, smoking a joint and being best friends. How times change. To complete the trifecta of disasters, Doug sees footage of Leanne Harvey's car crash, Claire gets the news that Kathy Durant has died, and Mark blackmails the president with Tom Yates' body. The bottom has officially fallen out. At Kathy Durant's funeral, who makes a surprise appearance? None other than Russian President Viktor Petrov. He argues with Claire about the situation in Syria, but takes the opportunity to land a jab, implying she's not the one really making the decisions. The tension is palpable. Even Linda, straight out of the past, shows up to threaten Doug and Claire. Doug, in turn, demands a presidential pardon for himself and Frank, but Claire says she can't pardon a dead man and leaves him hanging. To protect himself, Doug joins Congressman Cole's team, who promptly receives an offer from Claire. Beat her VP in 2020 and president in 2024. Claire also cuts a deal with Petrov. The Russian government will take the blame for Tom Yates' death, solving Mark's blackmail problem. Meanwhile, Tom Hammerschmidt brings journalist Janine Skorsky back to Washington to investigate the string of mysterious deaths surrounding the Underwoods. And the weirdest part, neither Claire nor Doug knows how Catherine really died. To top it off, Seth informs Doug that Frank left him more than just cufflinks in his will. And the final scene is the plot twist of the year. Kathy Durant is alive and well, living in France. And after a time skip, we're faced with the question everyone's asking, where is Claire? The president has vanished off the map for 3 weeks, and people are already speculating whether she's fit to govern. The Shepherds, who are no fools, see this as their golden opportunity to pull off a masterstroke. The plan is to invoke the 25th Amendment, a rule that would basically allow them to kick Claire out of the presidency and install Usher as the new top dog. Meanwhile, Doug visits his old psychiatrist to get Frank's will, but he doesn't stop there. With his detective mode activated, he continues to investigate Catherine Durant's death and starts to suspect she may have faked her own demise, like a movie spy. At the same time, journalist Hammerschmidt is digging up dirt on Rachel and finds a phone number that leads straight to Doug. The net is closing in. To complete the chaos, an anonymous staffer contacts Janine, claiming to have bombshell information that could tarnish the Shepard's reputation. In the midst of this mess, Claire reappears and tries to cut a deal with Duncan Shepard. He refuses, and she drops a bomb. She reveals she knows he's not Annette's biological son. The revenge is swift. Annette prepares to leak to the press that Claire once had an abortion. But, in a chess move worthy of a queen, Claire intercepts her cabinet seconds before they can remove her from power, fires everyone, and assembles a new all-female team. Peak girl power.
Meet my new cabinet.
Claire wastes no time and goes public. She not only owns the abortion story, turning the scandal into a weapon. Meanwhile, Jane Davis is kidnapped and taken for an interrogation with Claire herself, who believes she's involved in Catherine Durant's disappearance. Elsewhere, Congressman Cole acts as a go-between for Doug and the big boss, Bill Shepard. Bill tries to recruit Doug to his team, but he refuses the offer. The Shepard's family drama continues. Duncan, furious that they lied about his parentage, confronts the family. Bill's response is ice cold. He simply disowns Duncan as a Shepard. Journalist Janine receives a fax dossier filled with dirt on the Shepard's company, Arcus Corporation. Claire, for her part, decides to burn one of her enemies and reports Usher to the FBI for Tom Yates' disappearance. Things heat up when Doug and Hammerschmidt meet. Doug confesses to killing Rachel but refuses to confirm confirm that Frank killed Zoe, the Russian, and Leanne. It's the classic, I'll own up to one crime, the rest is just gossip. And then, a sequence of tragedies. Hammerschmidt, Catherine Durant, who really was alive, and Jane Davis are all murdered in a mass cleanup of loose ends. In the climax, Doug confronts Claire about Frank's will, expecting to be the sole heir. He even finds a secret flash drive under the president's desk, but Claire drops the biggest twist of all. She reveals she's pregnant with Frank's child. This means the baby will inherit the entire Underwood fortune, leaving Doug with absolutely nothing.
Francis and I have been blessed.
4 months have passed. Doug is visiting the spot where he buried Rachel in a very dark and reflective moment. Meanwhile, Claire, with a large baby bump, has decided on a total rebrand. She's dropped the Underwood surname and gone back to her maiden name, Hale. We also learned that the Shepherds tried a dirty trick. They hired a doctor to try to induce her labor early. Feeling the pressure, Claire decides the best defense is a good offense and launches a campaign to destroy Frank's image, even using a Russian troll farm to spread rumors about him. She's becoming increasingly authoritarian, blackmailing Congressman Cole to block a bill that would reduce her powers. At the same time, she plays to the crowd, seeking public support to fight her enemies. The House of Cards starts to fall for the Shepherds when the FBI arrests Duncan for treason. Desperate, Annette and Usher, who is no longer vice president, move on to their final plan, assassinating President Hale. They are no longer playing games. Both the Shepherds and journalist Janine try to recruit Doug to their side to take Claire down, but he has one single objective: to protect Frank's legacy. He won't help destroy Claire if it means tarnishing his former boss's reputation. His loyalty remains the most bizarre thing in this series. Claire decides to usher in a new era of transparency in government, holding a press conference to basically say everything was Frank's fault. It's the classic "it wasn't me, it was him" play, distancing herself from her husband to clear her own name. But on the other side of the board, we have Doug, who isn't messing around. He leaks the transcripts of Frank's audio diaries, exposing to everyone that he had cut Claire out of his will. It's the equivalent of posting screenshots of the group chat for all to see the drama. Meanwhile, Claire wants to play Rambo and proposes an attack on ICO terrorists who supposedly have nuclear weapons. Her war cabinet is basically like, "Madam President, hold your horses, let's slow down." This only serves to isolate her further. Seeing the mess, Annette and Seth look at Doug and think, this is the perfect guy to handle Claire. Doug in turn sends journalist Janine the location of Rachel's body, an old loose end. Then, he sends a small package to Claire, a copy of Frank's audio diary, and, as a bonus, a letter opener. Next, he shows up in the Oval Office for a little chat. And then comes the bombshell. Doug confesses that he was the one who killed Frank. The reason? Frank was destroying his own legacy, and Doug, as his #1 fan, couldn't let that happen. He threatens Claire with the letter opener and even injures her slightly. But when it comes time to finish the job, he hesitates. Fatal mistake. Claire, nobody's fool, seizes the opportunity, rips the letter opener from his hand, and plunges into his gut. And to make sure the job is done, as he bleeds out on the floor, she covers his mouth and suffocates him until he's gone. Game over for Doug Stamper, at the hands of the queen he himself helped create.